Hey everybody, this is TCG Productions here, and today we are going to be taking a detailed look at the video capture machine. Now, I may have done a detailed look on an HP Pavilion M7480N system quite a few years back. That is no longer the video capture machine. No, there has been another system between that and the one we're going to have a look at that never really got used, never really saw any video attention, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Anyways, let's go ahead and turn the camera around. And speaking of cameras, if you notice anything different about the video or the audio quality, I got a replacement camcorder because the Sony HDR-CX220 that has been the star of the show for the last decade, well, it's officially been retired from service. That will be covered in a separate video that will hopefully be coming down the pipeline soon. But anyways, this here is the video capture machine. Revision not 1, not 2, but revision 3 of the video capture machine. So, the original video capture machine was an HP Pavilion M7480N system that I retired from service over a year ago. In fact, probably getting closer to 2 years, because that system developed pretty severe hardware problems. I don't know if the motherboard was losing the plot or the CPU was losing the plot, but either way, something was seriously wrong with that system's core hardware, and so that system was officially retired from service quite some time ago. And so, as a replacement to that system, I transferred some of the hardware over to an HP, not an HP, to a Dell Dimension E521 series system based around an Athlon 64X2 processor. I kitted that machine out with 4 GB of RAM, a 640 GB hard drive, and moved the video capture card and I think the wireless card into it. I may have put a different wireless card in it. Well, I definitely put a different wireless card in it, but I definitely carried the video capture card forward into that system. So, and I used that system for a little bit, and then one day I went to fire it up and it wouldn't do anything, because turns out the motherboard is populated largely with Nippon Chemicon KZG series electrolytic capacitors. And anyone who's been working on computers for quite some time or has been in electronics for quite some time knows Nippon Chemicon KZGs are defective. Those processors are known to bloat and vent and short circuit and do all kinds of not fun things. Because and whenever that happens, the usual result could be an unstable system. But usually what I have seen when KZGs go bad is they fail shorted. And if you make the mistake of putting a power supply strong enough to just drive right through the short circuit onto the same rails as any faulty Nippon Chemicon KZG series capacitors, then the usual result is either foul smells or actually exploding capacitors. And none of that's any good, so that system had to be parked. And so what did I do? Well, I dug through my storage unit, scrounged up some parts, and put this thing together. This is a custom build system that I built out of 100% spare parts. Even the case has been put together with spare parts. And I mean the case itself. Namely, the actual case you see here is from a late 2000s custom built computer that I retired quite some time ago. And the front panel is actually off of one of two computer cases that I got a good 10 years ago for some completely unrelated reason or another. And unfortunately, well, one of those cases ended up being home to a system that one of my friends has now. And the other case, it had a few builds in and out of it over time. I think it was the home of my main workstation for several years, at least a couple of years. And it ended up becoming dormant, went into a cabin that at the time had no power, no climate control, and had actually developed a hole in the wall. Rodents got in, that case got peed in, and it went rusty. And so that case unfortunately had to be disposed of. But the front panel, I was able to interchange the front panel from that case with this one, because the front panel of this case had its own set of problems. I mean, first of all, it looked absolutely hideously ugly. And second of all, one of the LEDs, the wires had actually broken off the back of the LED, and so therefore there was no functioning power LED on that system. So, but yeah, anyways, yeah, the case is even put together from spare parts. So, speaking of case, you may or may not be able to see that I have two fans mounted, one here and one here, on the side of the case here. And those are not just because I could, they are actually necessary to keep this system cool. Because, as we'll see in just a few moments, this system is also based around an Athlon 64X2, a 6400 plus Athlon 64X2, in fact. And that is on an Asus motherboard of some description or another. Clickety clackety model in, click clack. Yeah, this system is based around an Asus A8 M2N-LA motherboard. So, and this is an OEM motherboard that HP used in a few different systems based around Athlon 64X2 processors. We see Athlon 64 later revisions, Athlon 64X2 and AMD Phenom processors. I don't think Phenom 2 fell under the AM2 socket. That may have been the AM2 Plus, but I'm not quite sure. Do not quote me on that. And most motherboards of that era that were running Athlon 64 processors, they had NVIDIA chipsets. Namely, the Enforce 4 is one of the most common that I have seen. And so, I'm going to go ahead and take the side cover off here. And as we can see, there are most definitely two fans. There are most definitely two fans mounted here. The larger 120mm fan pushes air across the expansion, pushes noticeable, quite a bit of air actually across the expansion card stack, and it also pushes air across the chipset heatsink. That heatsink was not there. HP was so bold as to just have this chipset out in the open with absolutely no heatsink or anything on it at all. And to make matters worse, they put that chipset in a system where the only ventilation came from the fan in the power supply, and the fan on top of the processor heatsink pulling air through the system. So that chipset had to have been running miserably hot. So I actually took some Arctic Silver 5, not Arctic Silver 5, some Noctua NT-H1 thermal paste. This stuff, it's expensive, but it is absolutely worth its weight in gold when it comes to superior thermal performance. I took some of that thermal paste and I stuck it on this heatsink down here. and stuck that on top, right on top of that chipset. And that, in combination with that large 120mm fan keeping things cool, serves to keep that chipset nearly room temperature. And the smaller 80 or 90mm fan that is on top, that particular fan serves to push even more air into the system. It directly feeds air to the processor heatsink and fan, and it also feeds air to the Northbridge heatsink, which you are probably able to see up here on top of above the graphics card. So I'll go ahead and I'll start pulling the system apart, and we can have a better look at each part in detail. So, and as I said, this system is 100% built using spare parts. The only thing I paid was the gas to fuel the vehicles that I went to go get the stuff that built this system out of my storage unit. So, first thing I'm pulling out right now is a graphics card. This is an ATI Radeon 2400 Pro XT. And this particular card, well, me and it have a little bit of a history, primarily with it not wanting to work. See, I got this card out of another random spare computer that has probably long since been dismantled for its parts. I probably saved the system core in a box somewhere. But this card, I have tried this in a number of systems, and it has played dead for the most part. And I don't know if it was just the BIOS on those systems not wanting to initialize the card or actively refusing to initialize it, because those systems apparently are only going to run integrated graphics, whether the end user wants them to or not. And oh look, we have another KZG series capacitor that has not yet bloated, which is surprising. And then we've got a TPO capacitor right here next to the PCI Express card edge card connector. And then we have another capacitor of some sorts, I'd guess Rubicon, just going by the sleeve on that capacitor. But anyways, this card has played dead before, and I've always kept it around because I haven't been because up to this point I had not been able to 100% confirm or deny this card's operational condition. And I went digging around for a graphics card for this system, something that would play nice with Debian, because the integrated NVIDIA graphics hardware on the Enforce 4 chipset, Debian absolutely does not play nice with it whatsoever. And so I wanted something that Debian would play nice with, and this card is one of those. And this card, an ATI Radeon 2400 Pro XT, Debian absolutely plays nice with this card after installing some non-free firmware, a non-free firmware package, so that way Debian can properly initialize this card. So this card absolutely works. I have no idea exactly how much video memory this has. I'd wager a guess as to say 256 to 512 megabytes. So, next card below that is the star of the video capture department here. This thing here, this card here is a Hauppauge WinTV PVR 150 card. PCI. It's not PCI Express at all. This is a conventional PCI card that is at least 18 years old and still working. So this card here, this has been carried forward through what is now 3 systems, and this is quite the capable card. This connector up here is for a connection that leads to what would have been front panel composite and S-video input jacks. However, this has not been used since the HP Pavilion M7480N system was retired. And this is our input stack here. We have, of course, we've got composite in, we've got audio in, we have S-video in, we have an analog TV tuner, but in oddity, we also have an analog FM tuner on this card, and that does work. I have not used the FM radio tuner on Linux, but I have used it successfully on Windows 2000. And I have used this card on Windows. Let's just put it this way. Using this card on Linux is 100,000 times more pain-free than using this card with the manufacturer's software on Windows. That's as far as I'm going to go with it, but 11 times out of 10 I'll use this card with Linux. And this card does work, and it works quite well. So that's the capture card. That's the heart of this system. Next thing we have down here is nothing complex. Is nothing amazing. It's just a gigabit network card, an Intel Pro 1000 GT. Why a gigabit network card in a system like this? Well, the onboard Ethernet hardware on this motherboard is only 10100, and the tech room network is gigabit all throughout. So there we go. Will you adjust your exposure? Looks like it. Intel Pro 1000 GT. This is a this card does have a small form factor bracket on it. I could probably scrounge. I might be able to scrounge up a full-size adapter for it, full-size bracket for it, but given how this is clipped in with a pair of metal clips, I'll probably keep using it as it is. So I have that there basically for maintenance purposes, in case I ever take a disk image of the system, so that way I'm not waiting 3 hours on that disk image to complete. And then last, but certainly not least, a wireless card. This wireless card is one that came out of the HP Pavilion M7480N system. It's a pretty generic thing. No brand name of any obvious description. And an odd thing to note here is that all of the approval numbers and whatnot, almost all of the approval numbers and whatnot here are generic. You see NCT type approved, bunch of X's, and these are also generic. And this is also generic. The only two things here that are not generic are is the RU number and the MIC number, as well as the FCC ID and the model number, but the CMI ID is also completely generic. So this may have been a pre-production card, I'm not sure. And with that cleared, and with the expansion card stack cleared out of the way, we now have what is hopefully a better view of the system core. So this is the cooler that I've got on top of the processor. There's a little bit of a story behind this. Cooler Master 460 watt power supply. Again, there is a story behind this, and this is going to be a bit of a tie-in to a future video that will be coming down the pipeline within the next, well, I'd say 11 months, 10 and a partial months. So this motherboard does have FireWire support. That's what that oddball, yeah, that's what that orangish colored connector is. You can see that there's a label on the top left, F_1394, front panel 1394. And it's been a while since I've messed with anything FireWire. primarily because of the fact that I have not had any need to capture or digitize mini DV tapes. So, and speaking of FireWire, we do have a FireWire connector on the back of the motherboard. We'll get to that shortly. This motherboard does have, I do have 8 gigabytes of memory installed on this motherboard. HP and Asus's official documentation says this motherboard can only go up to 4 gigabytes, but that's obviously incorrect, as we'll see really shortly. There we go. So I'll go ahead, unplug the power supply and the processor's cooling fan. Tuck these out of the way somewhere. I've got a couple different memory kits in here. This is all DDR2. 4 2 gigabyte sticks of 2RX8 PC2 6400U. And if it's not, so DDR2 800 megahertz, and yep, PC2 6400. So that's DDR2 800 megahertz. I'm only going to pop 2 of the sticks out since the other 2 sticks are identical to one another. You might have noticed that the one thing you might have noticed is that the memory kits, identical sticks are put back to back, and that's just because of how this motherboard has its memory channels laid out. Normally your memory channels are laid out such that memory channels A and B are physically interleaved with one another. So you have slot A, slot B, you've got channel A, channel B, channel A, and channel B. This motherboard does a little bit differently. You have channel A and you have channel B. So kind of an oddity, though it's not totally unheard of. So I'm not going to go as far as to take the hard and optical drives out of the system, because that requires a lot of back and forth flipping the case over, and I don't feel like doing that right now. So what I will do next is I'll go ahead and dismount the heatsink off of the processor. This is a little bit of a fiddly operation, just because of the fact that the mounting clips are sprung rather tightly, and so getting this out of here is a bit of a pain. There we go. That screwdriver should not ever slip. A screwdriver, if it slips, will probably be the end of the motherboard, in all honesty. Now, you might notice there's no thermal paste on the processor or the heatsink yet. That's because I only put this processor in here as a test, because this processor still ran too hot or it pulled too much power. I wanted to be able to swap it out without wasting thermal paste and making a mess. So this heatsink here, we've got a nice copper base plate, and it's a four heat pipes. We've got 2 heat pipes that wrap up here, and 2 heat pipes that do the same thing up here. And then we've got a nice fan on top that usually stays nice and quiet unless I've got the processor heavily loaded, at which point it'll ramp up and make its own fair bit of noise. And then we have the AMD Athlon 64X2 6400 Plus processor. So let's see. Yep, ADX 6400 IAA 6CZ from 2005. And then we have our AMD AM2 socket on the motherboard. This socket, even though it looks similar to socket not into socket 939 is not socket 939 and is not compatible with socket 939 processors. This socket has 940 pins, not 939, and it also looks different from socket 756, which I believe was the first socket for the AMD Athlon 64 processor. So, and we can also see the motherboard much clearer, which is I believe an Asus A8 M4N-LA. I'm probably getting that wrong. Look it up. Yeah, A8 M2N-LA, so I didn't completely butcher that. So we can see motherboard in much greater detail. The BIOS on this motherboard does not officially support this processor, but it will run this processor without modification. It does not know the model of the processor. It just says AMD. It just says AMD processor model unknown. But it will run this processor, and operating system software can use it just fine. And here we can see our heatsink. I may have to figure up a different way to mount that other than just a surface tension of the thermal paste holding it onto the chipset. We've got our 8 gigabytes of RAM. We have our Western Digital 640 gigabyte hard drive. Fun fact, that hard drive was actually the hard drive that came stock in this system right here, which is now the Tech Room file server. And then we have probably I don't know the brand of that optical drive, probably a Lite-On, if I had to take a wild swing and guess at it. So, yeah, the optical drive works, hard drive's just fine, clean smart stats from 2009. 8 gigabytes of RAM, Athlon 64 X2 6400 plus processor, Cooler Master 460 watt power supply. Now that is something I want to talk about for a little bit. That particular power supply was the power supply that was in my first ever main computer. And this power supply, this is identical to the power supply that I had in my first main computer. It ran fine up until late October or early November 2015, when I didn't see it do this myself, but I definitely heard it. When that power supply, it shot sparks out the back. The computer was still running, but I no longer trusted that power supply, and so it got almost immediately replaced with a Cooler Master CX450M power supply. And the Cooler Master power supply is still running today. That's actually on my mom's computer, which replaced a horrible piece of crap Insignia quote-unquote power supply that, let's just put it this way, I'm surprised the thing didn't blow up as soon as power was first plugged into it. So, and the Corsair CX500M power supply, that got replaced in my main workstation system with an EVGA Supernova G2 750 watt power supply in 2017, which is still running to this day in my main workstation. So there's that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the system back together. I've already cleaned off the processor and the heatsink as best I can, but I am going to do one more pass over it with 99% isopropyl alcohol. I'm going to do one more pass over the processor and one more pass over the heatsink, and one more pass over the tripod with my foot apparently. Make sure I'm doing the heatsink over here off camera. Make sure that those are absolutely clean. Just for good measure, I'll grab a nice fresh clean cotton ball, soak it with some 99% isopropyl alcohol, and go back over both the processor and the heatsink one more time. And I'll wait for everything to evaporate. So you can probably see by the change in surface color and contrast. Go ahead and cap off the bottle here. Alright. And go ahead and apply a nice big glob of thermal paste. Go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and set the processor heatsink down. Press that down. And go ahead and get the clips clipped in. This is a bit of a fiddly process here. Mainly because these clips, this mounting clip here, even though I have not yet, there we go, even whenever they are quote-unquote loosened, they are still sprung fairly tightly. So now that I've got this clipped in, go ahead, push that over, which tensions the clip, and plug the fan in, which finishes up the installation. So let me go ahead and finish putting things back together in here. And while I do, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the power supply and how that ties into an upcoming video. So that power supply was the first power supply that I ever really used in a main computer, by virtue of it being the power supply in my first ever main computer. And how does all this tie into an upcoming video? Well, as some of you may or may not know, my YouTube channel turned 9 years old on April 10th of this year. And that means that its 10th birthday is, relative to the recording date of this video, which is Thursday, May 23rd, 2024, a little under 11 months out. I want to do something special for that video. I want to do something special for my channel's 10th birthday. And that is a video that I will entitle, more than likely, 10 years of TCG Productions. And I fully intend for that video to cover pretty much my channel's whole entire history, going from basically the foundation of where I began messing with computers and messing with YouTube and whatnot, through the creation of my channel, its growth, into where we are today. And as part of that, I want to highlight and cover all of the hardware along the way, and software too. So there will definitely be some interesting things happening on that particular front. Anyways, I have gotten the system pretty much put back together. And so now all I really have to do at this point to make it complete is go ahead and put the side cover back on. Before I do, I want to talk about this fan right here. This S-Flex. This S-Flex branded fan. You might not be able... There we go. S-Flex. SFF21E says S-FDB inside. Suspended fluid dynamic bearing is what that is referring to. So what this fan... So the reason I want to talk about this fan is this is very similar to another fan that I had with my first main computer. This fan here, I had this mounted on the, well, I got this I got that particular fan many moons ago, and I cannot remember where I got it from. I may have gotten it with the computer, I may have gotten it at some point in the past, either shortly before or after I got that computer. I know that fan can be seen in my video entitled Demonstration of a 9-Year-Old Computer Saved from, Demonstration of a 9-Year-Old Computer Saved from Destruction, I think is the name of that video. Of course, I recorded that video 9 years ago. So that computer would have been at least 18 years old at the time I recorded this video. Now, unfortunately, the motherboard on that thing failed, and that system, the system featured in that video, has long since been disposed of, unfortunately. But I had the fan that I'm talking about on top of the processor heatsink to keep it cool. And I do not know where that fan has since run off to. I may have it in my parts collection somewhere. It may have gone into another system. It may have just completely failed. In fact, I think I remember exactly what happened to that fan. I accidentally put a knee on it and cracked one of the plastic mounts that go between the frame and the motor housing, and so that fan may be no more. So, but this fan is really similar to it. So that's why I wanted to talk about this. So anyways, with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and throw the side cover back on, plug these two fans back in, and we'll fire it up and have a look at the operating system software. The operating system in question, the operating system that I'm running on this system is, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, Debian 12. It may be a surprise if you were expecting me to say Debian testing, but nope. Debian 12 is the operating system of choice, mainly because it was the first piece of Debian install media that I had on hand that did not require me to go find and dig it up out of the file server or download fresh installation media. So, I mean, technically the installer is, at the time it was Debian testing, but Debian 12, codename Bookworm, has since come out, and the testing releases that you download off of Debian's website only track the next upcoming major version release, which is, as of right now, Debian 13, codename Trixie. So, I'm going to go ahead, hook everything up here. And before I do that, I do want to show the back of the motherboard, back of the system as it's configured. Again, we have our Cooler Master 460 watt power supply, and then we've got the back of the system. We have PS2 keyboard and mouse ports. We have a digital audio out, which is almost certainly in SP-DIF format, Sony Philips digital interchange format. And then we have the VGA connector. This for the onboard graphics, which I don't use because the onboard NVIDIA graphics in the context of Debian absolutely suck. We've got four USB 2.0 ports, FireWire 400, 10100 Ethernet, and then we've got our typical line in, line out, mic in, and then surround channels here. We have a center subwoofer channel, rear surround, and side surround. And then down here we have our Radeon 2400 Pro. Yeah, a Radeon 2400 Pro XT card here with an S-Video out connector. That'd be clever to loop the S-Video out on the card or the S-Video in on the capture card. We've got the Hauppauge WinTV 150. We've got our Intel Pro 1000 GT, and then we have our wireless card down there. I'll go ahead and get everything cabled up here. Clear the massive cables off of the monitor. And the reason why Debian 12 is on this system is, well, the reason why Debian 12 is the operating system of choice, and the reason why the operating system of choice is what it is because the previous installation of Debian on here, Debian 11 point something or another, it broke. It broke quite excitingly. It broke in a quite exciting fashion too. Because what happened is, I'm not 100% sure what happened, but I think one of the disk or file system drivers just got absolutely hosed from one end to the other, because it was refusing to do anything. It was refusing to create folders and files. It was throwing bogus out of disk space warnings and whatnot. I think what may have happened is that the reserved drive space somehow got set way, way, way too high. And that may have broken it as bad as it did. But apt wouldn't do anything, dpackage couldn't save me, and so I eventually got fed up with all of that, and I decided earlier this afternoon to go ahead and reinstall the operating system software. And so that is how Debian 12 became the operating system of choice. Turn the power supply on, fire it up. It does make a fair whack of noise. There's the Intel Gigabit Ethernet adapter coming up. And now we're in system setup. I'll go ahead and get the camera adjusted here. I'm going to lock the exposure where it is for now. It's probably fine. I'm going to tweak the focus a little bit. That looks good. And yeah, no, it is not 10 minutes past 2 in the morning. The system clock is actually set to UTC or GMT, whichever one you prefer. So UTC is Universal Coordinated Time, and GMT is Greenwich Mean Time. So it is actually 5 hours earlier than that. 9:10 p.m. here in the 9:10 p.m. deep in the heart of Texas. So the date is definitely correct. Change the BIOS to French or Spanish. Wouldn't that be clever? And we'll leave it as English because I'm not feeling that clever right now. And as we can see here, we've got 8 gigs of RAM on the board. For let me see, dual channel PC2-800, and we've got 4 2-gig sticks, so everything adds up there. BIOS revision is version 5.04. I don't know where it's getting core version 6.0 from. That could be the core that this BIOS is built on top of. It claims it's an HP A1710M, which is the model of the system that I pulled this motherboard out of. And then we have the product number and build ID, which are contextually meaningless right now. So, kick over to advanced, and it just says AMD processor model unknown, but it does recognize that it is a 3.2 gigahertz CPU with it says 1024K of cache RAM X2. So I don't know if that's referring to the L3 cache or what. We do have a plug-and-play operating system. We do have a PCIe primary video adapter. I'm just going to have everything on here, including the onboard LAN boot ROM, which corresponds to the Ethernet, 10100 Ethernet provided by the NVIDIA chipset. Onboard audio is enabled. Supervisor password is disabled. Then we have an option here. We have an option here called hardware monitor, and you don't normally see this in these HP Phoenix Award BIOSes. What I have done is I have the advanced BIOS here, and the way you do that is you hold Control and you press F10 and F11. So that's how you get that to show up. And as we can see, your CPU temperature is at a nice 102 degrees Fahrenheit. So everything looks good there. CPU and system fan speeds are okay. I've got both the fan checks enabled. Fan control is enabled. If I disable it upon reboot, it will send the fans to full speed, which I don't want. Everything looks good here. Full speed temperature setting is auto. I'll set that to 72 degrees C. What happens if I change this to manual? Goes to 68C, PWM ramp range, gets set to 40C. I'm going to leave it as it is. Power, and it does list that we have an advanced programmable interrupt controller, which is enabled. If I turn off, okay, I cannot modify the state of the API-C. Wake on LAN and S4, that's not going to be used in this case because I'm not going to have an Ethernet cable hooked up all the time. And S3 sleep mode, I'll leave that on. I do have the boot time diagnostic screen enabled, as you can see. If I turn this off, I just get the HP logo. And everything is as it is here. If I go to the network boot group priority, network group boot priority, that's a weird way to phrase that. Now, the first item on the boot ROM list is the add-in Ethernet adapter. Let me see, IBA GE slot 0350 V1222. The IBA, I believe that's Intel boot adapter. GE is Gigabit Ethernet. Slot 0350, that may be a slot ID. And then V1222, that may be version 1.2.2.2. Also brings to mind the poison control hotline riddle. 122. I'll splice that in if I haven't already.
1-800-222-1222.
And then we have the NVIDIA Boot Agent, which is the boot ROM presented by the NVIDIA chipset. So we'll back out of there. I'll just exit discarding changes and reboot the system. This monitor is pretty slow to initialize whenever it gets sync. And version 1.2.22. So go ahead and boot up into Debian Linux. I don't know why it's saying no IRQ handler for vector. Probably has something to do with a slightly fat and someone playing fast and loose with the interrupt vector table. Either that or there's a piece of hardware unusual enough in the system that it doesn't quite manage to properly hook into the interrupt vector table, even though it can add itself into the interrupt descriptor table. Of course, we're getting pretty deep down in the nitty-gritty works of the x86 architecture at that point. And there we go. LightDM has come up, and as you can see, this is not how the LightDM greeter usually looks when it comes up. No, I've actually edited the configuration file here and installed and told it to use a custom theme. And an all-black background. Why are you making noise, telephone? And as we can see, XFCE4 is starting to come up. We've gotten the notification here saying connection established. And there we go. Everything has come up. We have our desktop icons here. We've got our background. And we've got everything here. So, if we dive in, if we open up a terminal here and dive into the various ls commands, say lspci, lscpu, so on and so forth. We'll start with lscpu. And as we can see, if I extend this down a little bit more, we've got a 64-bit processor and 40 bits physical, 48 bits virtual address sizes. So I don't know if that would qualify as PAE or not. Probably not. Little endian, of course, as is usual with x86. We have 2 cores, both of which are online. And it's obviously grabbing the vendor ID and whatnot from the BIOS. You know, the vendor ID is Authentic AMD, Intel's is Genuine Intel. Model name, it's getting that from the BIOS because it says the exact same string the BIOS says, which is AMD processor model unknown, CPU family 15, model 67, stepping 3. It says CPU scaling megahertz 31%, which I don't particularly like because it doesn't give me the raw megahertz factor. It makes me do math on the max and min. So it says BOGO MIPS is 6413.06, and we've got a bunch of instructions here. Well, a bunch of extensions here. Yeah, we do have physical address extensions, okay. Not going to go into the details on all of these because we'd be here for an hour. We do have AMD V, and looks like we don't have L3 cache. We only have L2, so that's what the BIOS was referring to. We have 128K data and instruction cache. We have 128K L1 data and instruction caches. We've also got NUMA here. And this processor is only thing that affects this processor is Spectre V1 and V2. and it's telling us the various mitigations that are in use, as well as some of the sub-vulnerabilities which appear to not affect this processor. Of course, I could tell the Linux kernel to just go ahead and turn off mitigations entirely. Maybe net a little bit of a performance boost. So, if we dive into LSPCI here, as we can see, a lot of our core system hardware is from the NVIDIA chipset. Host bridge, we've got a host bridge, we've got 0, 1, 2, we've got 6 memory controllers here for some reason. We've got another host bridge, 2 PCI Express bridges, we've got an MCP51 host bridge and a low pin count bridge, and we've got an MCP51 SM bus controller, 2 USB controllers, we've got an IDE controller, 2 SATA controllers, got a PCI bridge, and it looks like NVIDIA is also the ones behind the audio subsystem. And of course we know NVIDIA is the ones behind the onboard Ethernet, which is only 10100, as I've said before. And then we've got our AMD hardware. We've got a hypertransport device, address map, DRAM controller, miscellaneous controller. And then we've got our VGA controller, an AMD. It says it's an AMD ATI RV610, though AMD, I don't believe, had purchased ATI at this point, though it was getting, we were a few years off from it by this point. It's an RV610 family GPU, though it does list the true model here. Radeon HD 2400 Pro XT. Says we've also got an audio device. Bus 2, device 0, function 1. So this is just a sub-device on the same card, I believe. So this makes the Radeon HD 2400 Pro XT one of the few oddball cards that can actually push audio out of its DVI connectors. And I have actually I've had this happen once or twice before, where I've had a display that not only accepts DVI but also has speakers built in, and well, it was definitely quite a shock whenever I was wondering where my audio went. So I turned it up, and suddenly audio starts coming out of the monitor's built-in speakers, even though I had it connected via DVI. So, and then we have an TrueFire 1394A controller. Hopefully that doesn't mean that it will actually light the connected device on fire. Because to quote UXW, make a reference to UXW Bill, he has had a fire at the end of the wire before. So, and then we're bus 3, device 8, multimedia video controller, Internext compression incorporated ITVC16 video decoder. That's on the capture card. And then we've got a Qualcomm Athros AR5413 or 5414 wireless network adapter. Well, at least that's the chipset in use. It does call the card out as a Qualcomm AR5006X 802.11 ABG card. And then we've got our Intel Pro 1000 GT controller, called out as an Intel Corporation 82541Pi gigabit Ethernet controller. So that's all the hardware in the system. And as we can see here, available networks, it only shows 2.4 gigahertz. That's all the card can use. So at least that's all the drivers that interact with this card can use. This card may support 5 gigahertz bands, because it is called out as an 802.11a. So yeah. And browsing the internet on an Athlon 64 Athlon 64X2 6400 Plus, is actually not bad. Though I do like to run uBlock Origin. So let's go to YouTube here and go to my YouTube channel. Page loads in a pretty respectable amount of time. So it scrolls fine and everything. The 2400 Pro XT can't really offer much in the way of hardware video decoding. So if we come over here,
receiving system. This video has been made to give you an...
And it looks like YouTube has decided to hoist the awful new layout upon me. At least here. Let me see if I can't turn that off. Doesn't look like it. Oh, we have a back redirect. Or not. Microsoft does that awful back redirecting crap. I hate that. I don't like this layout. Turn off autoplay while I'm in here. Stable volume, no thank you. Ambient mode, also no thank you. Stable volume is just volume normalization on steroids in the player. So I'll bring this full screen. Switch this up to 480p. And it will decode and play 480p video full screen without problem. So it does ramp the CPU and system fans up audibly. You may or may not be able to hear it.
Assembling the dish antenna and installing the mast, grounding and routing cable, connecting and aiming the dish.
I know that should be a lot louder than what it presently is. Oh, I see. There we go.
Activating programming.
There we go.
Wiring your system and fundamental operations. We'll also provide a section on how to install.
Strangely enough, it runs better in full screen.
And 4 satellites. That will be covered later on. By carefully following the directions provided in this video, along with the detailed instructions in your installation guide, you'll see that connecting to the dish receiving system isn't really all that difficult. Make sure that you have the necessary tools and skills to handle construction tasks.
Yeah, so it runs pretty well. So one thing I will do here is install Enhancer for YouTube and Firefox, because you need an updated version of Firefox for this extension. Oh, okay. This is 115 ESR and 115.11.0 ESR. So I guess I'm not doing that. But Enhancer for YouTube does disable this awful layout. Is it? And iframes. I wish iframes would die. And on the topic of gigabit Ethernet, no thank you. I'm just going to go ahead and install the speed test CLI program. And this is Ookla's speed test, just in a terminal. And this is over a hardwired gigabit Ethernet connection with a fiber to the home and fiber to the home internet infrastructure. It says 454 down and 518 up. I think we're being choked by the processor or the conventional PCI expansion bus in this case. So But yeah, I'm gonna see if I can't easily dig up something with a composite video output, so that way I can just play with the capture card and whatnot. Or I can just, or I could set this thing up in my room where it usually lives. So that way I can demonstrate the capture card. Of course, this video was captured using that capture card. So I mean, you can already see its performance. Just go watch the video. I'll link it down in the description if I remember, which I may or may not. Who knows? But anyways, I'm close out Firefox here. And of course, there's my YouTube channel icon. Shameless plug. Anyways, this is TCG Productions here. Peace out, guys. Peace out. And I will see y'all in the next one. So, now that I have given everybody a severe case of vertigo adjusting the tripod while senselessly rambling to a camera, I'm going to go ahead and continue to give everyone a severe case of vertigo, make everyone go blind with the camera losing focus intermittently, because it really doesn't have anything solid to lock onto. Again, adjust the tripod. There we go.